This is Eric Seleznow, Senior Advisor with Jobs for the Future. I want to welcome you to the webinar today. It's a pleasure to be here in the grand offices of the National Association of Workforce Boards in Washington, D.C. It's a beautiful little hot day here in D.C., but it's going well. It's a pleasure to be partnered up with National Association of Workforce Boards for this conversation today. I'm joined by my friend and partner, Ron Painter from the National Association of Workforce Boards. I think most of you know, or many of you know, that Jobs for the Future is a large national nonprofit that works in the intersection of education, workforce, and training. We have many partnerships across the country with workforce agencies, community colleges, and employers. We've recently kicked off our Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning, so we're pleased to participate and sponsor this. And, you know, Ron, I'll say before I turn it over to you, this webinar is in part due to a Department of Labor grant that JFF received and you partnered with us on, which is on diversity, increasing diversity and equity in the apprenticeship system. And so we're pleased that this webinar is part of that grant project under DOL. So I'll turn it over to you. Ron Painter.
Eric, thanks, and welcome to you. Great to be partnering with JFF. It's a great crew and a great organization, and we're having a lot of good experience and great fun. This is the second webinar. Some of you may have been on the first. I think people should record that Eric and Ron can listen, because one of the things that we recognized from the first webinar we did was that people had asked us more about come onto the ground, come out to the field, tell us like what's working, tell us some of the issues that are involved in doing this. So I am really excited that joining us today are three really fine local practitioners who are going to talk about a little bit about their territory of the country, and then talk about their experience with regard to apprenticeships. And that is some of you, and if you've been around, if you were at the last webinar, you will remember Jacob Maas from West Michigan Works, Sean Murphy from up in the Pacific Northwest, the Pacific Mountain, Washington State, and Keith Long from Kansas, Wichita, Kansas, the Workforce Alliance for South Central Kansas. So first, I want to thank the three of you for joining us and on the call, and I know people are going to look forward to that conversation. Do you want to remind them? JFF?
I'm sorry, what am I reminding them on, Ron? So, you know, today I think some of the discussion or a lot of the conversation that we want to have today is, you know, workforce boards can do this work in apprenticeship and work-based learning. There's some incredible examples emerging from across the country, some folks who've done it before who are doing it well, and so you'll hear from some of those examples today. But you know, there's a lot of challenges in doing this, but there's also a lot of solutions and a lot of good examples out there. I think as I think about it, Ron, and I look at what workforce boards do, and for those of you who don't know me on the line, I used to run a local workforce agency and run a state workforce agency. And you know, I think apprenticeship and work-based learning is not this mystical, magical thing that workforce boards can't do. I think it's very similar to the work boards have always done. It's partnerships, it's employers, it's aligning training providers and instructors on this. So it really is a lot about doing some of the work we've always done, reformatting it, reorganizing it, getting a little bit more knowledge of your staff and your boards into what apprenticeship really is. You know, I think and this may be repetitive to folks, but it bears being repeated, right? You know, apprenticeship programs do not belong to anyone. Apprenticeships have been around this country for hundreds of years. The Registered Apprenticeship system has been around for 80. And Ron, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that this month is the 80th anniversary of the National Apprenticeship Act, signed by President Roosevelt in 1937, in August of 1937, I might add. And Ron, I'd also be remiss if I didn't remind folks that JFF is sponsoring a webinar on September 12th at 1 p.m. Eastern in honor of the recognition of 80 years of registered apprenticeship in the U.S. And so we hope to have a good lineup for that webinar. So mark your calendars for September 12th. I'll remind folks about another webinar we have in September on diversity on September 11th. More information on our JFF website about that. But you know, apprenticeships don't belong to anybody, right? Labor unions have been figuring it out for 80 years, and building trades most particularly, but it's been building trades, manufacturing, and those sort of things for many, many years. They do it well, but it's also emerging, as you're going to hear about today, in workforce boards and community colleges and community-based organizations, and others are getting in the game, and it just becomes something to be worked through and learn about so you can do them. And there's some great examples. And again, most importantly, it's happening in a lot of other industries, in IT, healthcare, cybersecurity, insurance, and financial industry. So it's happening all over. And I think for workforce boards that we don't hear very much from the system yet, although I understand, Ron, you're hearing from the system now about it, there are opportunities to get involved and engaged, and hopefully funding will come and continue and support that.
Yeah, and I just think, as you were saying, to me, it's part of the continuum of the conversation with the employer. It's part of what's in the toolkit. And also, I think it's really, really cool because in education, we've understood how, or we've done a lot of work around how we learn, accelerated by the work on artificial intelligence. But as we do that, we understand some people learn sitting in a classroom, some people learn doing. And sometimes, and I've had directors tell me this, the reason they do work experience, the reason they get involved in apprenticeship is because when you see some particularly young person who may not be what we would think might be really articulate in an interview, when you see them create, they really know what they're doing, and they can really see what they're working on, whether it's product, whether it's services. They can really see it, and the apprenticeship gives them an opportunity to connect work and learning to it. I want to highlight a couple things that we have learned. Again, you know, this whole notion of earn and learn, work and learn at the same time, is really, I think, pretty exciting. It's another way for workforce boards to be able to work with employers almost on that continuum. We talk about career pathways. This is really, I think, part of the learning pathway for individuals. We do understand when you were there, and still the U.S. Department of Labor is investing in expanding apprenticeships through the partnerships with workforce boards and with others. And again, I just think this is a really interesting way for workforce boards to work with employers in a variety of ways. And I think when we've done a survey, a number of the workforce boards have responded. We really appreciate your response. We're learning a lot. I think we were pretty pleased and surprised, I guess I have to say, pleasantly surprised that 2/3 of the boards responding to the survey indicated they were already very deep in the apprenticeship relationship. And that took a variety of roles, whether that was, and Eric, you and I have talked about, we're going to need to go back and refine this a little bit, look a little bit more. We want to make sure our nomenclature is the same as the local, but we saw boards that sponsor, we saw boards that do the investment, boards that are intermediaries, boards that are the sponsor, that hold the registration process. So it's really encouraging to see that boards are as deeply engaged in this as they are.
Yeah, and I think a couple were also DOL grantees. I know Shenandoah, the Valley Workforce Board in Virginia, and up in upstate New York, Herkimer, Madison, those folks were DOL grantees. So the workforce boards are getting connected in a lot of different ways, right? And so the fact that you did a survey on that, Ron, is great. I think it's going to sort of bring up some other programs, and I think workforce boards will see that they're not alone out there doing this sort of work. And look, we don't need to sell the participants on doing this, right? I mean, you're here on the call, so obviously you all are interested in it. So
If
you're ready, why don't I move into the slides?
Yeah, I was going to say, I
Let
think,
me let you finish up and then
no.
we'll go to the slides. Yeah.
I think that's a great intro, because if people are on the call and they've not done the sponsorship or the registration, we've got, again, 3 practitioners who are going to be able to help you understand how to do this and share their experience in working through it.
That's right. And I think what we're going to hear today, and I think what an important point for people to take away is there's a lot of roles a workforce board can play in the apprenticeship system. You can be a leader and an intermediary and a program sponsor, very detailed work. We'll talk about that. You can just be a really good partner, right? And partner with existing programs in your area. Use your funds to support your customers going into apprenticeships, get good partnerships with existing programs. You can get in certainly the youth space and pre-apprenticeship. Again, we want to make sure they're high quality pre-apprenticeship, not just the low quality pre-apprenticeships. But the workforce system, I think, is uniquely posed, and we're hoping there's a lot of take up over time, and thus this and our accelerator in Chicago.
Right. And I will, before you go on, let me remind folks, so as you're listening today, please send a question into the chat room or raise your hand. If there is something that you're not sure of, Middleton K at NAWB.org. Again, Middleton K at NAWB.org, and Kelly will make sure that your question or your comment gets to Eric and I, and if it's a technical question, we will certainly get an answer back to you. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Eric.
All right, excellent, Ron. So what I'm going to do now is there's about 6 or 7 slides. I'm going to flip through them very quickly. They're downloadable. People can get these slides after this. We can make the slides available in case you need them. Pretty basic stuff on apprenticeship. We just want to set up the foundation and equalize the knowledge base amongst folks. But we really want to get into the conversation with our guests on here. You know, look, the basics of apprenticeship, 5 really important components. You got to have employers at the table. Employers are critical to this. You don't have an apprenticeship program if you have an employer, and you really shouldn't have an apprenticeship program unless you have employers, a pre-apprentice, guiding you and providing you their information, what they need. Look, we already do this work in the workforce system with sector strategies, sector partnerships, and career pathways work. So employers are really important, have to be around the table to form these programs or to connect with them. The second one on there about apprenticeship is structured on-the-job learning and mentoring. So that's on-the-job experience. And again, you know, for registered programs, that means around 2,000 hours of on-the-job mentoring, on-the-job learning a year. Again, say on the job, many of you have done OJT contracts, so that can certainly work for some of the OJT portion of apprenticeships. So workforce boards can get engaged and involved. But that structured on-the-job learning is what makes the difference. You're on the job, you're earning and learning. So there's about a 2,000 hour a year requirement for that. There's some flexibility with that. I think I won't speak for DOL, but around 2,000 hours. The other part of it is the RTI, the related training and instruction. That's generally about 144 hours a year. You can set that up in a number of different ways. You know, traditional programs are like 4 years on the job training, and then structured on the job training, 144 hours a year over each one of those years. But you got to have a training provider. Many of you already work with other training providers, community colleges and community-based organizations to do that. So that related training instruction has to align with the work at hand. That's an important part. You know, it's a reward for skill gains. And so, you know, the key to apprenticeship, the plus for employers, they can bring somebody in at an entry-level wage. Over time and competency and skills gain, you know, they can raise those wages until they complete the apprenticeship program. And then, of course, they should have what the employee would normally get for those circumstances once they complete the apprenticeship program. So the rewarding skill gains is a really important part of apprenticeship. And then all apprenticeship programs sort of end with a national credential, right? It's either issued by the state apprenticeship agency or the Department of Labor. So those 5 components are important. We'll go to the next slide, Kelly, if you will. So look, there's a Department of Labor labored over TEGL, Training and Employment's Guidance Letter 13-16 that came out in January, I believe. And that TEGL will walk you through. It's rather long, but it's really full of information. You should use it as a reference. It talks about funding. It talks a little bit about pre-apprenticeship. It talks about how to put it together. It gives you a really good foundation for your staff and your board. So I always want to refer the workforce system to those interesting T-goals put out by the Department of Labor that are so good. And I know you agree. Next slide, Kelly. So look, there's a number of ways to put apprenticeship programs together. You can go to one company and work with them, help them develop their standards. The employer provides the OJT. They serve as the sponsor. I'll talk about sponsorship in a minute. They, employer provides the RTI or a training partner who does. You can do it with one employer, and that's fine, and that works, and some of you do that. Or you can sort of put together a larger project, particularly if you're doing sector work, and we'll hear about that from some of our speakers, where you bring 10, 20 employers around the table and organize them. You aggregate the demand and create a regional apprenticeship program for that set of companies or that set of businesses in your area. Really successful model. There's examples of this all over the country. North Carolina is probably an interesting place where they do that. It's one that comes to mind. But that really is organize your employers, find what their common need is across for training and for apprenticeship. Let's give them an opportunity to grow their own workers and create their own pipeline. Typically, joint labor programs are like this, but not always. There's other examples around there too, and oftentimes they bring in the college as a training provider of the RTI. So you can do it with multiple programs. You can have an intermediary. In Central New York, the Central New York Manufacturers Association is a great intermediary that works with companies to organize around that. So if you find an industry association, a chamber, or somebody else who's doing apprenticeship work in your community, the board doesn't have to lead it. You can just be a good partner in it. I think that's a really important message, is you can just be a partner in apprenticeship. You don't have to be an intermediary or sponsor. You could just be a partner. So this just shows that there's many different ways to partner in an apprenticeship program, and I think that's what workforce boards do best, Ron, is they partner. And so it's not that different from a lot of your other programs. Next slide, please. So again, not to repeat myself too much, employers have to drive the program design and what the related technical instruction should be. There needs to be, a place for the on-the-job training. You got to have employers. Sponsors. So sponsors administer apprenticeship programs. Sometimes employers fill out the paperwork, sponsor their own program, because, when you set up an apprenticeship program, you have to identify learning objectives and standards, complete some other paperwork for the Department of Labor. But sponsors or intermediaries can help bring employers together and do that work with employers. So there's one example, Zurich Insurance. I always use it because it's a really good one. Harper Community College worked very closely with Zurich Insurance to create the apprenticeship program. They did all the heavy lifting for them. In the public workforce system, you're going to hear a great example today, but look, the public workforce system can provide a lot. We've got funds to support apprenticeship. We've got OJT. We've got some youth schemes and strategies, and we can drive pre-apprenticeship programs. Lastly, as the educational provider. It doesn't have to be a community college, although it can be. It can be your local labor union. It can be an employer who does this. There's examples of employers who do their own technical instruction, so there's a lot of examples to that. Sorry, I'm running through this so quick, but we can drill down on this. So I'll move on to the funds because Kelly's moving me along very quickly here. The bottom line is, there's a lot of things workforce boards do, and apprenticeship is just, another tool in the toolbox or another thing on your buffet table of services to folks. So you should be thinking about that in assessment and case management. You can think about pre-apprenticeship. We'll hear about a workforce board today that is deep into that. You can use ITA dollars, but what I really want you to think about is cohort training, right? It was a great result from the Recovery Act work that we all did, but certainly putting together a class for that related technical instruction is a very efficient way of doing it. You can use your OJT funds to support apprenticeship. There's some youth funds that, 20% of youth funds must be used for on-the-job work experiences. So that's another opportunity for you to get engaged. You can do apprenticeship with incumbent workers. We have some packages in manufacturing on incumbent workers as well as others do. And then of course, workforce boards are great in the support service world. So lots of opportunities to get involved. Next slide, Kelly. And this is just a little bit of a repeat, but wanted to highlight, right, that if you have a group of folks or one or two people who are getting into apprenticeship, you can fund some of the cost of apprenticeship with OJT dollars. The related technical instruction, again, is typically how we fund training for people. Can be ITAs or the cohort training. And then lastly, those support services are very important.
Right, and I'm glad that we're highlighting supportive services, because in conversations, when I'm looking at the letters that we're getting from employers in support of workforce development, federal engagement or workforce development, consistently they talk about, they see their role, the heavy hand of their role in helping to design the curriculum, in providing the employment opportunity, all the wage stuff, but they continually point to what has really been critical in the project has been the boards aligning supportive services and working with the individual to make sure that there's plans for life. And I think we so too often overlook how much all of us have a network. And I think we take that for granted. We don't walk through with people, what's your network look like, and make sure that that's in place. So I'm very happy that that's there.
Yeah, and I think, all those supportive services, if you enroll a WIA eligible participant in an apprenticeship program, provide them support services, it's going to have a direct result on completion rates. Now, completion rates for apprenticeship are pretty darn good in the country now, but, a lot of folks need supportive services, particularly with some of the customers that come in our door, and we put them on that career pathway into apprenticeship. So it just proves the point you were talking about. So that's important. So the last slide I just want to hit, and performance always made my head spin when I was part of the local workforce system. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I will tell you that look, you're going to, if you use apprenticeship as a strategy, you're going to get some very good performance outcomes. It's going to be helpful with your WIOA performance measures. But one of the most important things I want to leave you with is, and DOL has done some looking around at the data. Most workforce boards don't enter their apprentices into their systems, right? They count it as employment and then they move on. Yes, it's employment, but it's also apprenticeship. I believe under WIOA, there's actually a tab for you to click on, and your case manager should enter that in apprenticeship. So you should enter your people in the data systems. I think you can see, and you can keep them on in the apprenticeship program for a year or up to 2, as long as you're providing them WIOA services, right? So you have to make sure you're doing support services or checking in with folks. But just because you place them in a job, which is an apprenticeship, doesn't mean services end under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And I think that's a common misperception among boards. They say, well, they were a dislocated worker, then I got to them an apprenticeship, and then they were employed, and I can't serve them anymore. Well, under WIOA, you can do that, and you can keep them on for a while until you have to exit them. So, it's getting somebody a credential. It's, the average wages for apprentices are around $60,000. So you're going to get good earnings. You're going to get a credential out of it. And there are absolutely measurable skill gains that are very, very specific and really stand out in the apprenticeship. So as it relates to performance, it's there. So I went through a bunch of slides really quickly. Sorry, I spoke fast. Kelly's rushing us through these, but again, that's not as important, I think, as some of the resources that are out there for this. And you hit the next slide real quick, Kelly, before we go to our panel. So, DOL has some great resources on the DOL website. We at the Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning at JFF are assembling some other resources, so that'll be available in the future. But there's some how-to books there. There's the Teagle, there's the how-to book, but a lot of the folks that are going to be your friends in setting up apprenticeship programs are going to be your friends at the state apprenticeship agencies or your friends at the Department of Labor in the states, in the Office of Apprenticeship States. I think you should know who your apprenticeship contacts in the states. There's a big transformation in this country where I see apprenticeship staff in states and with the federal government going out of their way to work with partners to develop these programs, whether it's working with employers, working with workforce boards, working with a partnership you pull together. So please don't hesitate to contact your state or federal apprenticeship leads. Lastly, I mentioned JFF Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning. We're trying to harness some of the national momentum around this. We're trying to bring together national resources and promising practices and case studies and TA and pilot and deploy some new solutions. So we just announced it last month, and we'll be doing more formal launch in the fall. But go to our website at jff.org and click on our portal to the Center for Apprenticeship and sign up for our information and newsletters. We have a number of events coming up that we want to keep you in the loop with. So with that,
let me just quickly jump in and add that the issue around the certification, NAWB is participating in a number of working groups and task forces on what are industry recognized credentials. You'll see more of that at the forum in March of 2018. But I also think that for workforce boards, it's just really smart strategy to take time to figure out what's the industry recognized credential and how to make sure the individual has it, because we're going to deal with this individual, who knows, 2 or 3 times in their working career as they move forward. It's really in your best interest to make sure that that's a viable industry credential that the individual comes out of the apprenticeship with, because it makes our collective work smarter as we experience the individual, throughout their working career.
Sure. And with apprenticeship, I mean, that's built in. Your credentials are built in. And, apprenticeships don't have to be 4 years. There are apprenticeships that are a year, year and a half, 2 years, high quality ones with rigor and standards. So there's flexibility, but all of them, what they have in common is that people are meeting the requirements for a credential. So an apprenticeship, you're going to get one.
Could we be apprenticeshipable?
Absolutely. Department of Labor has apprentices on board. There's some people, many people we know, and I think, Ron, we could start you an apprenticeship program soon.
Kelly,
we could do that soon.
Eric and I could learn what we're doing.
All right. In the interest of time, Ron, I know somebody's got to keep you on track. We're going to move on to our panel, and I think I have the pleasure of introducing our first panelist because, but look, I went through a lot of information quickly, folks. Again, we'll get those slides to you. A lot of that is not rocket science. If you spend a few minutes with it, I'm sure you have staff who are generally familiar with it. And again, there are resources in your states and certainly at JFF and elsewhere, NAWB, that can certainly help you think through that. And I guarantee you there's already apprenticeship activity happening in your area. So connect with some of those folks as well, and they can help you walk through that. So look, I'm pleased to be joined by Jacob Maas, or we're pleased to be joined by Jacob Maas today from West Michigan Works. I first learned about their apprenticeship program at the NAWB conference 2 years ago, and I was really blown away about the work that this workforce board was doing. Really, I won't call it cutting edge work, I'll call it bleeding edge work, Jacob, because you guys really jumped into apprenticeship because your staff, found some workforce intelligence in the community and acted on it. So, Jacob, thanks for joining us from West Michigan Works, and tell us your story about pulling together, being one of the first boards in the country, really, to pull together a registered apprenticeship program out in Michigan.
Sure. Great. Thanks for the opportunity, Eric. Really appreciate it. Appreciate the confidence of inviting me back to speak. Certainly, it means that I didn't do that bad the first time we had this webinar. So as it relates to our medical assistant registered apprenticeship program, we use the multi-school, multi-employer apprenticeship model, basically meaning that we're the intermediary sponsor. We hold the standards, are responsible for full administration and operation of the program, and working with all the participating employers and stakeholders necessary to make this successful. We were basically working with 3 hospital systems, Cherry Health, Mercy Health, and Spectrum Health. And just to put it in perspective how large they are, I mean, they're ecosystems on their own, and they hire more than 150 people per week, some of them hiring over 100 per week, and having a large region beyond our region, some of them hiring 25 to 50 a week. Just within a few counties in our West Michigan area. So with low unemployment, right now in West Michigan, we're in the 3 percentile, somewhere mid 3s. Sometimes I've seen months lower than 3, depending on the MSA that you're taking a look at. But those hospitals were really struggling to fill their medical assistant vacancies. And so each of those organizations committed HR, so human resources, and department staff, basically are subject matter experts to the development of the program and standards. We then maintain monthly, since we started about 3 years ago, we then have maintained monthly apprenticeship training committee meetings just to make sure that program success and development practices continue as we move forward with future cohorts. We're kind of in the middle of recruiting for our third cohort, and so I certainly have some data that I can share with you probably later. But we handle the recruitment, so West Michigan Works is responsible for the recruitment. We do a rigorous pre-screening and intake process. Workshops are then conducted to ensure the candidates are work ready and to compile a career portfolio, which basically means that we give them a bunch of tools and resources and assessments to take with them, even if they aren't selected, and we try to work with them with other opportunities if they aren't selected for the program. And then the career portfolios are then delivered to the employers for review, and employers make their candidate selections, and selected candidates meet with career coaches to determine which funding they may be eligible for. So I mean, throughout this process, I think it fits well with what you're trying to do with this grant is really, we're pulling away a lot of the biases that employers might have when selecting their applicants, whether it's what school they went to or where they live or where they're located. And so the portfolio really helps identify the skills and the requirements match based on what employers' needs are. So a little bit about our region, just so other boards can relate or maybe not relate to our size of our organization. We cover a 7-county region in West Michigan. The population is approximately 1.3 million. Our largest county being about 600,000 in population. But we still work in that rural space too. We have three counties that are about 60,000 in population each. Even though I'm sure there's some on the conference call that are like, wow, that's huge compared to some of our counties. But you do face different issues, depending on the urban or the rural, and the urban having a ton of resources, but lack of coordination, and the opposite in our rural areas where there's just not a lot of resources, including transportation, housing, other issues that play a factor when making sure we're providing employers with qualified candidates.
So Jacob, can I interrupt for a second? I don't want to short that, but I really want to get to the point. So look, here you are doing your workforce business. How did you get smart on apprenticeship? How did you figure out how to be a sponsor? That's not easy. It's not rocket science, but it's also not easy. How are you able to pull that together? Because I think that's what most boards want to know is, wow, West Michigan became a sponsor for apprenticeship. That's a heavy lift. Is it? Was it? How'd you do it?
So we worked directly with the employers. The employers actually requested us to be the sponsor. So the nice thing is that, with our region being 7 counties, a lot of our partnering agencies, whether it be the community college or other community-based organizations, their geographies don't really match what the employers, where the employers are pulling their labor force talent from. And so we provide that, that in a sense, intermediary or conversation piece, neutral party, not really having any type of agenda or in search of additional funds or grants or something of that nature. Really, we're just a neutral party and neutral voice. So it worked well for the employers to say, hey, look, we want Michigan Works to be that sponsor. And then frankly, it really helped align the curriculum with the community colleges to make sure that no matter what community college they went to, they're getting the same level of quality curriculum, all identified by those employers that are pulling a regional labor force. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So right. So you have the partners, you have the employers at the table, you have your colleges who conduct the related training, technical instruction. So you have all of your partners around the table, and then how is your staff able to figure out how to do the standards, how to do the different types of paperwork that are involved? I keep hating to use the word paperwork, but for lack of a better word, that sponsors have to do, or intermediaries and sponsors have to do. So sure. How did your staff get smart and all that?
Yeah, I think that goes along with the who question on the PowerPoint. Is that we worked closely with first we had to determine that there wasn't any apprenticeships going on or anybody really in that space. And once we did that by working with the employers and taking a look at some of the data, we worked with the USDOL Office of Apprenticeship and our state, the Talent Investment Agency. They were key partners in this, helping us identify and understand, because you explained it a little bit earlier, Eric, that it's not this confusing, magical thing that happens. It's really structured, and and the structure is helpful to get through the process. And, you know, as I mentioned in the last webinar, you know, we're skilled at bureaucracy and paperwork and all the forms that need to be done, much more than what some of our employers are. And so we kind of took that role on, making it easier for employers, and frankly, even some of our smaller to mid-sized employers we're working with too, really help them understand the value that apprenticeships bring then. And we're taking some of the heavy lifting away from them by being the sponsor.
That's an excellent point. You're making good friends in the employer community, no question about it. And the application of WIOA funds for this, for dislocated workers, adults, that's fine, hasn't presented a problem. You figured that out. All of your people are eligible as you screen and assess them. Is that how you're working with that?
Yeah, so we worked through a variety of funding streams. It certainly was one of the challenges that we faced. It was, you know, even for us, it was interesting to try to figure out how we can get each one to pay for it based on their own individual requirements by the grant. So we did work with Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. We worked with reemployment service dollars. Our state has skilled trade training funds that they set aside, so the employers had to apply for those, which they qualified for. The students qualified for Pell Grants, so Pell Grants covered some of the costs. We have Apprenticeship USA grant. We have an expansion grant, and so it truly was this blending of funding streams that really made it so that the graduates could graduate debt-free and have a job immediately upon graduation. So it was really a great way to help leverage all of the costs and make it cost-effective for the student to go to
great.
school.
And I believe you're on your 4th cohort now. So how many people have you put into as apprentices to the healthcare system in your part of the world?
Yep, we're on our, I think we're technically in our 3rd. So the first, we graduated 24 cohorts. 24 apprentices the first year. The second year, I think they're graduating this December. We have 30 currently going through the program, and right now we're projected for 39 for the next year. You know, another one of the challenges is that, you know, we're filling the demand from the employers, but the demand now and the interest from the job seekers has grown exponentially since we started. We had 140 in year 1, 196 in year 2, and then in this 3rd year, we had 472 applicants for the projected 39 apprentices. So, you know, it's a good spot to be in, frankly, because there's other jobs and occupations and apprenticeships that these individuals might be eligible for, but it's a challenging spot when you're going to pull about 10% of them into apprentices, and there's 90% to work with still.
Right. But these folks are working and earning and learning all at the same time. It certainly is a little bit different than our traditional one-stop model or workforce model where we, you know, assess somebody, send them to training for 6 months, and then try to get them a job. They're already engaged in work and learning all at the same time. Right. So one last question. We got about 30 seconds left. What would you recommend to the other boards that are listening in today if they wanted to get really deep into apprenticeship like you have? What would you recommend?
Sure. I would say the first step is if you don't have a business solutions team, start one. So whether it's a business solutions rep or an employer account rep or somebody that just works directly with the businesses, make sure that you have that staff on board to really work one-on-one with those employers or in the cohort experience with multiple employers. Take a look at the data, talk to your employers, start an industry council on some of your bigger sectors. I think that's how we started down this path. This is one of the first projects that we really worked with our healthcare sector. And then make sure that you're talking to the community colleges, talk to the U.S. Department of Labor Office of Apprenticeship in your state to see what apprenticeships either exist or maybe even don't exist to make sure that you're not creating something duplicative that doesn't necessarily fill the demand. So, you know, they seem to be easy steps in the process, and frankly, if we can do it, we feel confident that anybody can do it.
Okay, Jay. Well, you guys and your staff, kudos to your staff for doing it, the leadership out there, and you know the fact that you're on your 3rd cohort, going into your 4th, the employers are still with you, and you're having good performance outcomes is all very positive. So, a great example from West Michigan. I'm turn it over to Ron Painter. Ron.
Thanks, Eric. We are going to head west. We're going to head west to Tumwater, Washington, where I know they are in anticipation of the Huskies opening September 1st against Rutgers. And we're going to be joined today by Sean Murphy. Sean, it's great to have you. Pack Mountain, really one of the jewels of the workforce development system. You guys are focusing on pre-apprenticeship, Amazon, and really a very deep focus on veterans. So I appreciate you taking time out of your morning, I guess, to join us, and the stage is yours.
Well, thank you, Ron, and thank you to everyone. Appreciate the opportunity here. So, you know, it's this pre-apprenticeship space has been an exciting space for us, really for the last couple of years, and in general, really evaluating how it works in the overall apprenticeship space. I will focus most of my my comments here on working with the veteran population, but a little bit about Pack Mountain first, and that, you know, Pack Mountain is a 5-county region. We predominantly rural. We do have the state seat. The capital is here in our region, which does have some level of urban to it, but for the most part, we are a rural region covering about 7,000 square miles. Included in our region is a bit of an overlap with Joint Base Lewis McChord, which also overlaps with Workforce Central, our region just to the north. And for the last 6 years or so, we've been providing services out of the base and in different grant formats, predominantly though within the dislocated worker arena. And for the last 3 years of that, have been running Canada Commerce. This has been a joint effort with Workforce Central, and this work has been funded through the National Emergency Grant Fund program. And so in that effort, though, we've, in the last 3 years plus now, we've placed over 1,000 folks into employment, either transitioning military or spouses. Actually, I think as of today, we might have hit the 1,100 mark. But what's important in thinking about that is that of those that we've enrolled to date, 65% of them have gone through some sort of short-term industry-based training. Now, drilling that down, over 100 of those folks that have transitioned into employment have gone through a pre-apprenticeship-based program. And just to clarify for us, I think it's pretty standard, and you talked a little bit about it earlier, but pre-apprenticeship programs for us are those that are direct entry into registered apprenticeship programs, either union or non-union type of opportunities. And so over the last few years, now at the America's Job Center that we have co-located at JBLM, the base, and through Canada Commerce, we've had a partnership with two different projects. One is the Veterans in Piping that others have probably heard about, does placements for folks all across the country. And then we also have the Allied Painters Project. On looking at both those, of course, both being in that construction trade area, the VIP program is a program that has been around really since the beginning of a lot of this work at Joint Base around transition. And I believe they also have sites on other installations elsewhere as well. But it's an 18-week pre-apprenticeship program that directly places into the trade upon transition from the military. One thing I want to digress for a second that is pretty important about all this work is that not only are we playing in the space of working with the trades on the pre-apprenticeship, working with but we're also working with the base, because ultimately any program that's provided prior to transition for service members needs to be an approved, what they call career skills program. And that goes through a vetting process that it can take a few months, but ultimately has been pretty streamlined at this point. And so all of these programs really kind of fall under both DOL and Department of Defense in that. What's really key is that in that career skills program, whether it's a pre-apprenticeship program or not, whether it's just short-term training, all of them have to lead to at least a guaranteed interview upon successful completion of the program, though of course the preference is a guaranteed opportunity. And that's where the pre-apprenticeship really came in for us. And so looking at the VIP program, they were established upon us being there, and we were in a position to come in and support clients not only with employment preparation type of activities, but also on support services, and then in a few cases actually support them if for some reason the pre-apprenticeship didn't work out or placement into the union didn't work out. Additionally, we started working early and often with the Allied Painters Union, and we're able to develop out a 4-week program, them working on the training side of it, of course, and us working on with them to get approval through the military. And in that, we're not only helping to fund all of the eligible students that go into that program, we are funding their training, or at least a large majority of it. We're funding support services and also helping to recruit into that program. And so that's been a very successful effort over the last couple of years. We've done not only a 4-week program into industrial painting, but also into glazing. Now I believe we've done that on 2 occasions. And those folks that were not picked up as far as eligible, the union has been able to come in and support on the other half of the costs. So that way they could, we didn't exclude individuals who made sense for going into that.
Hey, Sean,
yeah.
It's Ron. Let me go back, because this is an area that I get a lot of inquiry about, and that has to do with how much work you're doing around the pre-apprenticeship. So because it has to lead directly into the apprenticeship program, I guess, first of all, how did you guys negotiate that? And then secondly, do you limit the number of people that you're putting into that pre-apprenticeship? How do you make that determination?
Yeah, so, both are slightly different in the fact that, with the Allied Painters, we were there from the beginning with the development of that program there. But both of them, of those programs, have been designed in a way that they're only putting people into the number of people in that program that they feel they can ultimately place upon completion of that program. And in some cases, especially with the Allied Painters, that may mean that our business team is also supporting to make sure that happens at the end for each of those clients. But they're really the key driver on that. And ultimately, not only do we have to pay attention to that because of our own performance numbers, but also with DoD and working with the installation, they're also keeping track. And so if our numbers start to fall behind on placement, they will get rid of the program as fast as we got it started.
So this is not, this is not like a casual, you guys roll the windows down as you're commuting and say hello. These are some pretty deep partnerships around strategy, both for you and for the employers that you're working with, right? This is not something that's just kind of casual.
No, it's not. It's not. Because of the fact that, not only you're working with our own parameters, but you also have the parameters of the DoD side of it as well. And I will tell you, early in this, because I don't want to scare people away from this potential, because early in this, I will say it was much more challenging to get these things rolling. We're now at a place that I think not only, especially the Army, but for us locally, have really streamlined how to figure it out. And that's what's leading to our next project that we'll be launching here in the fall. That's really exciting. And that's with what we've learned in this, we're working with an organization here located in the state of Washington that is helping us to develop out a 4-week general pre-apprenticeship program that will ultimately have relationships with multiple non-trades, or both union and non-union, for placement into a wide variety of different apprenticeship opportunities, still predominantly in the construction trades, but will really expand out our abilities to place people in different directions and expand the opportunities for placements.
Pretty cool. So it's led you to places that most likely you as a workforce board would not have been had you not undertaken this work. Yeah,
and I think where this is exciting for us too is that you're spot on in the fact that not only has it allowed us to go to another another space where we're really at the front line of helping get it off the ground. Though we won't be the primary sponsor, but we'll be a very big stakeholder in making it happen. Is we're now in process of developing out one that would not just be on the installation, but be located in more rural parts of our region. We're finalizing which location that's going to be, but working on that and then looking at how can we support some of the barriered populations. So we're hoping that what will end up happening is we'll have some folks going in with disabilities of some level and working to support them through that. We're also working to say, okay, not all of our more rural areas will have placements that will go into registered apprenticeships. So for those that don't make it into registered apprenticeships, how can we connect them into more industrial type of opportunities? And that's where we're working right now to build out that partnership with those employers.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. We're gonna move on because we want some time for questions, and I'm going to turn it back to Eric.
I just want to make a point. Sean sort of talked about this, and the reason that why we partnered with NAWB on this grant and want to work with workforce boards is because this is a diversity and equity grant, right? There are challenges in the apprenticeship system about diversification and inclusion of more women, more minorities, more people with disabilities, and getting other people engaged in the game with access and opportunity. And I think what workforce boards, one-stop centers, American Job Centers bring to the table is a diverse group of customers that come in for our services, right? And so, it's a very purposeful strategy that DOL had in this grant. It's a very purposeful strategy certainly with JFF to try to promote this. We're working in 4 cities right now and with others, but how do we get others in the community feeding people into apprenticeship programs, feeding diverse populations into apprenticeship programs? And so that's a big part of this. And we think WIBs are, ground zero for the ability to get diverse populations into a lot of programs, including apprenticeships.
Yeah, and I think, we're going to hear more from Keith, but I think part of what Sean and Jacob point out is the agility and the flexibility of the workforce boards and the system when they are tied or when they are really inextricably tied to the employer's strategy. Jacob talked about how we have changed assessments and we do, we change up how we do recruitment, how we do assessments. Sean's talking about working hand in glove in terms of the entry into the pre-apprenticeship. So, yeah, I think it's one of the things that lots of times we don't trumpet enough to employers is if you're looking for that diverse pool, there are really ways we can get you some qualified folks to job.
Yeah, and a lot of large national corporations, that's a very big interest to them as well. So certainly boards can do that. So I'm sorry? Okay, so we're going to move on to South Central Kansas and to Keith Mawing at the Workforce Alliance of South Central Kansas. Welcome, Keith. You've been neck deep in a lot of sector work and other work for a while. So tell us about getting involved in apprenticeship. And you and I were talking earlier about your role as an intermediary and how you help employers. So let's talk about that for a little bit.
Great. Hey, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Shout out to both NAWB and JFF. We've had the pleasure of being involved in both organizations for a long time and got some quality technical assistance. And again, appreciate the opportunity to maybe share some of the things we've learned over the years. And also just so impressed with the other panelists, Jacob and Sean, and some of the things they're doing around registered apprenticeship. And to echo some of the comments earlier, I think there's a lot of opportunity for workforce boards in this space. We got involved, and just real quickly about South Central Kansas, we are the Wichita, Kansas, largest city in the state. We serve a 6-county region, so much like what maybe Jacob was describing, both kind of a rural, bit of a suburban area. We have some very small counties, so an interesting geographic mix. Air capital of the world, we build airplanes. If you've ever flown anywhere, you got there safely, you're welcome. I guarantee you a part or the plane was built here, whether that was a Boeing, Airbus, or Cessna, Beechcraft, Learjet. So again, very heavily leveraged in manufacturing, but started looking at registered apprenticeship. I became the director of the board here about 2005, and basically responding to board members. This goes back in the WIA days, Workforce Investment Act days, and we had two representatives on our board, representative apprenticeship programs, had a brand new board member, the electrical apprenticeship side, and came to us and said, can your system work with my system? And we hadn't done much before that. This is back in 2007, 2008. We started drilling down and learning, about registered apprenticeship. And the more we talked about it at a board level, it really became an obvious strategy for us to engage in. And we also started talking to our partners about this. And again, the earn and learn model was something that the board was very interested in doing. So we started that relationship with the electrical apprenticeship program, went on to plumbers and pipe fitters. We are heavily involved in, like Eric said, the intermediary role. We do the recruitment, the screening, the assessments. We take the applications. We also look to apply our WIOA funding wherever possible, primarily around supportive services. That's another common element that we heard, and that's really what started the conversation, because some of the applicants needed things like help with buying tools, help with buying equipment, clothing, books. And they were going to earn money once they got in the apprenticeship, but it was the front-end expenditure that where the need was. And so that was more or less our entry point in there. And the more we got involved in it, it really started promoting our performance metrics. We saw that. We worked with the apprenticeships directly, the sponsors of the programs, and we were really worried about or concerned about tracking the data. Because in a 5-year registered apprenticeship program, you have competency points along the way, and that's where you earn that industry recognized credential. You earn a particular certification before you become a first year or second year. And so we looked at that to apply to our WIA and now WIOA performance measures. So again, it just really became a great idea for us to be doing this. And the earn and learn model is just, you can't beat it. It's both that working, that earning, that learning piece of it. And so for our participants to start earning wages immediately as opposed to going to school first, again, just became something our board was very interested in getting into.
Keith, I had the pleasure a couple of weeks ago, I was up in Kenosha, Wisconsin with your community college president. And, I think you have a pretty good partner there. I wanted to ask you, how difficult was it for you with the employers to reach agreement on these competency points? And who were people that were really helpful in doing that?
It was primarily the apprenticeship sponsors, and I think it was mainly clarifying where we could identify those particular competency components. We were starting with very well-developed programs. Again, electrical apprenticeship, plumbers and pipe fitters. So it wasn't that difficult once we opened the communication channel. And certainly, these are labor organizations, so they're union sponsored. And again, because we had that representative on the workforce board, we just took advantage of the beginning of that relationship and built a much stronger relationship. Community colleges, and this to me is what I love about community and technical colleges, they can be very responsive, and the ones we have here are just great partners, and we were able to get them to the table as well. And we all listen to the sponsors. We listen to them to identify where that related technical instruction could come in, and again, for us on the WIOA side, where we could apply our performance metrics to those programs.
Keith, you mentioned, this is Eric, you mentioned earlier about helping employers with the heavy lifting. Could you talk a little bit about what your staff does? We've gotten a couple of questions about how much staff time does it take to do all this? Is it a big drag on your staff to sort of help with the setting up of the standards or doing some of the necessary paperwork for apprenticeship? Can you talk about the impact on your staff? Was it
and I would say overall it's minimal, because we view this as one of our core services overall to almost any employer. We utilize our Career Center, our Workforce Center for, as an entry point to take the applications, just like we would do for any other employer who wants to utilize our services. As far as filling out paperwork, we've been doing on-the-job training agreements with employers for some time. So we had a system in place. So again, working with the employer sponsors on the co-enrollment piece, because that was one of the things we had to identify up front. We did not want the person being accepted to the apprenticeship program before we were able to co-enroll them into WIA, because they could become ineligible to WIA if they were already making wages above our so, you know, those were the kind of I would say, technical deals we had to work with. But as far as a burden on staff, it really just folded in nicely with the services that we're both providing to job seekers as that potential entry point, and then the same thing we do with employers. We help employers, you know, post jobs. We help employers develop job descriptions. We bring them labor market information. So it just became one of those core services for us to our dual customer approach.
Yeah, hey, Keith, Jacob mentioned, it's Ron. Jacob mentioned that it took maybe, I guess, a year, 2 years, but the reputation among job seekers that West Michigan is the place to go. Have you noticed that with people coming into to your one-stops, that they're coming in with, you know, more knowledge, or they know what they're shopping for, they know you're the guys to go to?
Yes, I would definitely say that. I mean, you know, there's a big word of mouth component, and that helps. We do everything we can to promote registered apprenticeships into the community. You know, one of the questions on the slide is, in terms of moving forward with registered apprenticeships, we're really drilling this down both into our opportunities into our WIOA youth program, but to the secondary system overall. I mean, even for young adults or high school kids that we're not touching directly through WIOA, how does registered apprenticeship become one of those career and actually a post-secondary education tool? So yes, I think that the more we've been in this space, the more we've been recognized. And since we've been implementing WIOA, we now are actually taking our Workforce Center takes the applications for almost every registered apprenticeship, active registered apprenticeship program in the region. And that, again, runs the gamut from the skills trades. We even have one in childcare out there. So, again, I do think that, especially with the way the economy is, people are looking for employment opportunities. And if there's a training component, that is even drawing them more into that kind of option.
Well, and I think you made the point, right? It's getting people working, making money, and getting training at the same time instead of the typical way we've done things in the system. So what advice, Keith, would you have for other board? Well, before I ask that, so you work a lot with labor or related programs, but you're also looking to explore outside of just that group of folks to other.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think one of the, you know, when I talk about registered apprenticeship, and I've talked to other workforce boards over the years about this, like I said, we've been in this space for a while. A lot of employers, there's two concerns they have. One is and we're a right to work state, we're a very red state. So unions, especially with some employers, are not something they view favorably upon. So they're worried if they would start a registered apprenticeship program that opens the door to organized labor. That is certainly not the case. So we are working hard to educate employers on that piece of it. And then I think the other misconception and the service that we can bring is the paperwork needed or the complexities of getting it registered, officially registered. And again, we bring that tool to employers as well. So in addition to those traditional ones I've already talked about where we've been in that space, we really want to use registered apprenticeship as a new training model overall. You know, we have very low unemployment. We've got employers that say we've got a hard time attracting skilled workers. So we're putting this in our business services toolkit and saying you can grow your own. You can grow your own people. You can do your own training program. I think Ron might have mentioned earlier some of that traditional model, waiting for somebody to get out of a community college, whether that's an associate degree level or even a short-term level. Here's a way for that employer to have more engagement on the front end. So we view registered apprenticeship as an old model with a whole lot of new potential applications.
Well, Keith, I want to say, again, thanks to you and the work that you do. When I was at the NC3 Learning Conference in Kenosha, I got to see some slides of the Aviation Center that I know that you were a part of out there in Wichita. Congratulations. It looks beautiful. Yes, I would accept pretty much any invitation to come out and join you at on a tour of that facility. Great
Outstanding.
looking space.
We will be happy to host you in the Sunflower State sometime very soon.
All right, thanks. Eric, back to you.
All right, great. Thanks, Keith. So that was an old strategy with new application. I really like that. I'm going to have to steal that from Keith. That was an excellent thing to say. And the point of letting employers grow their own workforce. There's a lot of energy around that. I think a lot of employers, once they do apprenticeship, they are converted and they will bring other employers in. It's just a matter of putting those pieces together to help them out. So let's go on to our next thing, which is a little bit about an equity strategy. Joining us now will be Deborah Kovis. Deborah is our project director at Jobs for the Future. She's the one who's managing this grant from the Department of Labor. We would like to turn it over to Deborah a little bit to talk a little bit about building equity in apprenticeship. Deborah?
Thanks, and I'll be very quick so you have time for discussion, but I appreciate the opportunity to highlight the importance of really being explicit about developing equity strategies when we're thinking about building out registered apprenticeships. So Eric has mentioned a couple of times that this webinar is done in partnership with our equity contract with National Association of Workforce Boards, and we are really working to have a variety of strategies to increase diversity and inclusion within registered apprenticeship programs. And we're working with national and regional partners that we think can really help with that diversity goal. We have a variety of partners, including employers and community colleges and community-based organizations, but we see workforce boards as being a really central component of getting diversity into registered apprenticeship. And the reason is because we think that all of you align very well with the three basic strategies that we see to building in diversity. The first one of those is increasing referrals. So we know there are lots of great apprentice candidates out there that might not actually even know about apprenticeship or how to find, where and how to apply and don't know the value that apprenticeship can bring. Similarly, there are a lot of apprenticeship programs that don't really know where to look to recruit and identify qualified candidates. So, workforce boards are expert in making these connections and building that bridge. And so we're excited about helping the national conversation focus on workforce boards as a partner there. The second way is promoting quality pre-apprenticeship programs, which you've heard about already today, so I don't need to dwell on that, but just to say there are a number of candidates out there who just need a little bit more support before they would be competitive to be selected for an apprenticeship program. There often are, specific occupational skills or other academic skills that you need in order to qualify for a registered apprenticeship program, and pre-apprenticeships are great for that. And workforce boards are particularly well positioned to expand the number of pre-apprenticeship programs that are out there because of the wide range of training partners that you already work with. So rather than trying to build these pre-apprenticeship programs from the ground up, by connecting to workforce boards, those that are interested in building out a pre-apprenticeship can start with effective job training programs. And then the third is to really think about how the registered apprenticeship programs themselves are designed to make sure that they have an equity lens included. And again, what we've heard today, I think, points to really strong examples of that. But having organizations like workforce boards that know the range of populations and the range of needs that come into registered apprenticeship programs can help position program design to make sure that all the apprentices succeed in both the apprenticeship and in their career beyond that. So thank you, Eric and Ron, for letting me have a couple of words here, and thank you to the workforce boards for being such natural partners in this effort.
Well, thank you, Deborah, for your leadership on this issue. Deborah's sort of working with a number of people across the country, very deeply in 4 sites across the country, and trying to make the connections to give more access and opportunity to people who wouldn't ordinarily have that access and opportunity. Once again, a really important role that workforce boards can play in increasing equity amongst the people we serve. So thank you, Deborah, for that. So I think that's the wrap on the interviews. I think we want to handle a couple of these questions in the few minutes we have left. Kelly, why don't I just answer a few that we have, and then do you want to open up the lines?
Absolutely.
The lines are open.
So if you are interested in asking a question over the phone, over your audio system, please raise your hand and we will unmute your line and you'll be able to ask your question.
All right. While we're waiting for some of them to call in, I'll just hit you a couple of questions. There's this guy, Daniel, from Washington, D.C., that sent me 13 questions. Daniel, I'll probably get to 2 of them today. But he asked about cohort training, right? And so, you know, we have ITAs in the WIOA system. You can do onesies and twosies with ITAs, or, you know, you have the okay under WIOA to do agreements with institutions of higher education, such as community colleges and others, or you have the ability to contract out for that. But you could, for example, if you're working with 5 manufacturing companies and you want to train a cohort of 15 or 20 people for this particular apprenticeship project across all those companies, you screen and assess people, you come to an agreement with your college, do a contract with your college or your training provider, and do it as a cohort group of people that you screened and assessed that you want to train together. Onesies and twosies, you can do it that way with ITAs. I think it's easier to sort of organize a cohort training, and you have the ability to do that either with your contracting authority or under WIOA with institutions of higher ed. We've seen examples where community colleges and boards have come together, they screened, assessed everybody, put them in the class at the college, they go as a cohort, and then they go into their apprenticeship, or they're on apprenticeships while they're in their training. So that would be one way to pull. And then, of course, Jacob, who had to leave, by the way, so that's why I'm answering for him. You know, Jacob talked about blending money. He used some state money, he used some grant money, he used some economic development money that supported the efforts of, I'm sure, staff and the ability to cover the costs of the related technical instruction. Remember, an apprenticeship, an employee is working, so the employer is paying them. So the big, you know, in Europe, they cover the costs of the related technical instruction. The U.S. doesn't always do that, but you have Pell Grants that you can use. There's SNAP funds that you can use. There's WIOA dollars that you can use. So you have to be a little bit creative and think, Daniel, about how you organize those funds with the scheme you're trying to put together. But there's a lot of flexibility in how you put those dollars together, and I'm sure I didn't even cover all of them.
I'm going to, I know that Keith and Sean are still with us, so I'm going to put this question back to the both of you. The question came in about tracking for the apprenticeship programs, and Eric mentioned briefly that you can have somebody still enrolled with you and hang on with you for a while. Sean, when do you guys exit people from the program once they enter into the apprenticeship? And then Keith, the same question.
Yeah, appreciate that. So, you know, it's always amazing what you learn in these kind of preparations for these kind of webinars and conversation. But, you know, up until now, we have been enrolling them, putting them into the training, and then exiting them at the point that they get employment. Now, often they will finish their training, their pre-apprenticeship program before they transition from the military, and will have a gap. We will keep them all the way to the point of employment, and that's when we would exit them into the registered apprenticeship. We are now evaluating how we can continue to keep them on for a period of time to make sure that they're being successful in their transition 6 months down the line.
Yeah, and you can absolutely do that under WIOA. And Keith, similarly, because you brought this up, I think, in one of our prep calls for this, can you talk a little bit about your thinking about that? Because it was very refreshing to hear you talk about not just dropping them once you get them into an apprentice.
Yeah, and you know, that was, I think, the initial challenge for us. We're like, especially we talked to the electrical apprenticeship folks, and it's like a 5-year program before you get your journeyman status. But within that 5-year time frame, there are multiple competency points. To become a first year into a second year apprentice, you have to demonstrate competencies. So we sat down, and that is, again, you sit down with the sponsor and you recognize where those competency points are. And that folds in nicely to our WIA and now WIOA outcomes, because that really does become an industry recognized credential or a certification point as that apprentice progresses through the system. So that is, again, something what I would recommend to workforce boards. If you're working with an established apprenticeship program, identify where that exit point is. So for us, if we've got somebody in that electrical apprenticeship program, we may exit them in that first or that second year point where they've earned those competencies. They're continued to be employed. We track it after that. And again, I think the benefit from what we're looking for to create new apprenticeships, those can be more competency-based as you create a new one with maybe an information technology company or manufacturing company. So again, can kind of help you at the workforce board level get those measurable skill gains, those wages, those employment after exit measures that we got to track. The one concern I have, going back to the slide that I didn't really address when I was talking earlier about questions do you have about engaging apprenticeship going forward, I think it's the data collection piece. You know, we are part of the American Job Link network. I think that goes into 10 or 11 different states, and we're looking how we enter data into that system. I'm concerned that some of those data tracking systems, if they do have an apprenticeship module on there, the staff aren't aware of it enough, or if they don't, then we're not able to track that data. So if you're starting just getting into the apprenticeship space, be sure you look at your data tracking, make sure you've got the right fields, make sure your staff knows how to track the data, because that, again, is one of the concerns I have as we're adjusting our systems moving forward.
Well, that's a great point. And like I said, I've seen reports where data was pulled from a lot of different webs about apprenticeship. And there were workforce development boards that were doing apprenticeship. I knew they were connected to it somehow, but they were showing 0 enrollments in an apprenticeship program. So it's really important to figure out what that is, train the staff to make sure they're entering the data. I think if Jacob were here, Jacob had to go off, as I said, but I think if he were here, you know, you have a lot of flexibility. They're not, like Keith talked about, a 5-year electrical program to journeyman, right? Jacob's program is not that. There's flexibility. It's a shorter term program. You get folks in, they're working, but they're also still in training, and many of them still need support. So, you know, just because you get them in that job in healthcare in that apprenticeship program doesn't mean, oh, they got a job, now it's time to exit them, which is what we've always done in the workforce system. You keep them on there for a while, work with them, ensure their completion success, and ensure that very important credential, which I think Ron and Keith rightly spoke about.
Let me, at risk of a non-scripted question, going back, Sean, to you and to Keith. So we've been talking about, and we talked about, Jacob talked about, and I know, having talked to both of you, the notion of blended funding. I mean, the funding for this stuff comes from multiple places. Has your work with the apprenticeship, the partnerships that it takes to do that, have you noticed that it has increased or strengthened your relationship with your partners? Are they getting better results out of the work because they're working with you on what I would call something as concrete as the apprenticeship work?
Yeah, so this is Sean. What I will say in that is that our ability to blend funds and ultimately use those blended funds to do these cohort-style pre-apprenticeship trainings, or in the case of some of apprenticeship but are still cohort short-term industry trainings, our ability to mix and match funds so we could maximize the potential of who is entering those programs is the key part. You know, we recently had a project that was not pre-apprenticeship, so I'm hoping it gets there in a short-term training for log truck drivers. There would have been no way for us to run that program in a rural community, as it was said at the time, if we only would have used, say, dislocated worker dollars. In that case, able to leverage adult programming and dislocated. We are also looking at in the next classes in the future, leveraging TAA and some other funding sources to do that. Similarly, we've seen that out the base in working with the pre-apprenticeship programs. Our ability to leverage other funding sets has maximized the potential of who's going into those classes.
No, I think that's right. I think that's good thinking, that you're thinking about trade, thinking some of those other things. But I would say to my brothers and sisters in Workforce Development Board land, it's not always about the money. There are scores of employers who gladly maybe not gladly, who cover the costs of the related technical instruction. Their pain point is growing their own talent, getting their own workers, making sure they can train them the way they want them. And so if I take a Gulford Apprenticeship program in North Carolina, it's sort of a semi-rural program, very impressive. Employers at the table, they're leading the way. They're covering the costs for most of the related technical instruction because it's worth it to them. And they're getting a return on that investment, and they'll tell you. So, you know, many employers are covering a lot of the costs here. They're covering the pay for the work of the apprentice, and many of them are covering the cost of the related technical instruction. They're also providing a supervisor or mentor on the job. That's part and parcel of apprenticeship, as I spoke about earlier. So there are a lot of costs for employers. Many employers will cover those costs as they think it's worth it. Of course, many can't, particularly small and medium-sized businesses, even large businesses. So they rely on working with us and our partners to figure out mechanisms and way for them to cover the costs. I think they're willing to pay the salary of the folks if they can, but OJT can certainly help them with that. But it's that related technical instruction. Again, in Europe, you know, they cover the costs of that. In Germany and Switzerland, in the U.S., it isn't. So we just got to get that covered. But sometimes employers will cover those costs. So just helping them organize around that, I think, is good.
And I want to echo that point Eric just made, because again, for the workforce board system, and that's what we've seen a lot of, where that employer does pay for the RTI, the other pieces, but we can come in with the supportive services piece. We can come in and again, leveraging those other dollars through those co-enrollment pieces. So we actually, our average cost per participant goes down with registered apprenticeship, but the performance level is just helping us go through the roof because of the wages, because of the employment after exit and those types of things. And I think the last point, just to push on the money side of it, again, the blended funding, we have an America's Promise grant that is targeting manufacturing. We intentionally designed the grant around giving us the flexibility to use registered apprenticeship either in an incumbent worker training setting or an on-the-job training setting based on the demand of that employer. So again, when we go out and meet with these employers and say we have training dollars, we are using registered apprenticeship as one of the models we want these employers to buy into. So again, it is leveraging other dollars. It does make our annual allocations and adult, associated worker, and youth go farther when you can layer a grant or partner programs from your one stop on top of those dollars.
So, great, Keith. Thank you very much. So we just have a few minutes left. I'm going to try to hit a couple of questions real quick that came in. Judy Bauer asked about a copy of the webinar when we're done, and NAWB is going to post that at some point, a link to the webinar when we're done, and the slides. Let's see, Alma Arenada asked about if Jacob got any pushback from employers. No, I mean, I think Jacob would say the employers came to him looking for a pain point and looking for a solution, and not looking for a pain point, looking to solve a pain point. But I think that's what drives many employers, most employers, to registered apprenticeship, is there's a pain point. They say they're not getting what they want from the public school system. They're not getting what they want out of colleges or community colleges. People are showing up without the basic job skills that they need or soft skills or any of that. So apprenticeship gives them a chance to craft a program that helps grow their own workforce. So he got no pushback. In fact, the group came to him, as he said, from one of his industry council pieces of work. We talked a little bit about tracking outcomes and successes of apprenticeship program. Again, it's entering the data. You know, apprentices get entered in the states or the federal system in something called the RAPID system, which is the apprenticeship system. So some of the data is caught in there, but that does not take the place of what you have to account for WIOA eligible participants. So you have to enroll them in the WIOA system to get some sort of credit for it. And finally, somebody has asked if there was a way to get materials that promote apprenticeship. So one great resource I'll send you to is just go to Google USDOL/apprenticeships shareables. There is pages of outstanding materials from the Department of Labor that are shared from apprenticeship programs from all over the country. There's data, there's talking points, there's stuff from National Apprenticeship Weeks. There's some great materials. USDOL/apprenticeship shareables. That should pop up on Google for you. You know, specific to workforce boards, I think you can go to the West Michigan website. They do talk a little bit about their program on their website. I think that's a good to-do for us, Ron, is to maybe collect some materials from WIBs.
again, if there's something specifically you're looking for, middletonk@nawb.org, and Kelly will help direct your inquiry, get some resources to you. And I think one of the takeaways for workforce boards from today, I think, employers are looking for people who can perform for them. I think we hear time and again that workforce boards are one of the biggest secrets in an area, at great risk because they are not a sponsor, but I get my coffee roasted by Carabiner out in Boulder, Colorado, Eric and his crew, because it is good stuff. And that isn't because Eric found me, I found Eric. So when employers are looking for where can they find a partner to deliver what they need, if you're deeply engaged with employers, you're going to be the product, you're going to be the place that they know they can go to. You've heard today that job seekers have come to learn that you're the place that they want to go to because you're connected to employers. So I think this is an area that really solves many problems for workforce boards and for the employers in their region. So with just a couple of seconds, I want to say my thanks to Eric, to Deb, to the crew at JFF and here at NAWB, and my thanks to Jacob, Sean, and Keith for joining us today.
And
Eric?
Thank you, Ron. It was great. Yeah, thanks to everybody as well. Listen, so on September 11th, there's a webinar on getting employers to equity. If you want to learn more about equity and diversity, have your staff engaged in that one. On September 12th at 1 p.m. Eastern is the 80th anniversary recognition of the American Apprenticeship Act. Spend an hour. It'll be an interesting conversation. And then, Ron, I think the big deal is we're doing an accelerator. JFF and National Association of Workforce Boards is joining together and doing what we call an accelerator, which is a one-day event in Chicago on September 19th. Come in on the night of the 18th.
We will be in Chicago at the Palmer House September 19th for the accelerators.
And that would be a chance for you to send some of your staff there. I think we have some slots open where we do a deep dive. I don't want to call it a boot camp, but figure that, it's a deep dive immersion in apprenticeship, so people walk out of there with a much better and excellent understanding of how you can apply apprenticeship in the workforce board setting. So Ron, thank you for having us down here today.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Eric. Again, thanks to the crew here, and thanks again to Jacob, Sean, and Keith. So until we chat again, thank you for joining us. Please send us a note. Let us know how we did. Let us know what more information we could be providing to you. middletonk@nawb.org. Thank you.